The bolt would not move. Thomas Callahan pressed harder against the charging handle of his M1, Garand feeling the metal resist as if it had been welded shut. Nothing. Not even the grinding that would indicate metal sliding against metal. Just the absolute stillness of a mechanism that had ceased to be a mechanism and had become instead a solid piece of useless steel. It was 8:15 in the morning on December 7th, 1944. The Hürtgen forest in Germany stretched in every direction 70 square miles of pine trees so dense the sun barely reached the forest floor. 3 inches of frozen mud filled the foxhole where Red crouched. The other men in the squad knew him only as Red for the shock of copper-colored hair that refused to stay flat under his helmet, hair the exact shade of the Montana clay he had grown up walking on. Through the trees 40 yards ahead, 9 German soldiers were advancing. Red could see them moving between the thick pine trunks using proper infantry tactics, advancing in bounds, while others provided covering fire. Their Kar 98K rifles were shouldered and ready. Those rifles were bolt-action designs from 1898, primitive compared to the American semi-automatic M1. But those primitive rifles worked in the cold. And Red's rifle, the finest battle rifle in the world according to General Patton, was frozen solid. 3 inches of mud, 40 yards of forest, 9 enemy soldiers, and a rifle that might as well have been a club. Red looked at his weapon and thought about the 7 men who had died over the past 2 weeks with similarly seized rifles. Thought about Johnny Blake, 19 years old, who had shown Red a photograph of his little sister the night before a jammed rifle got him killed. Thought about Frank Murphy, who had trusted the Army manual right up until the moment he died, folded over his broken weapon. 40 yards became 35. The Germans were advancing with the confidence of men who knew the Americans were having equipment problems, who had learned that if you pressed an attack in winter conditions, half the American rifles would jam within the first 5 shots. In 48 hours, this same frozen rifle would kill every one of those 9 German soldiers. In 48 hours, Red would have modified his weapon in direct violation of regulations, risking court-martial and 5 years in Leavenworth. In 48 hours, he would prove that sometimes a mechanic from Montana knew more than all the engineers at Army Ordnance combined. But that morning, crouched in frozen mud with Germans advancing through the trees, Red could only remember the faces of the dead men whose rifles had betrayed them. Could only think about the moment 2 weeks earlier when he had looked at Johnny Blake's rifle and known it would fail and had said nothing. To understand why Red Callahan was about to commit a crime that would save 700 American lives, you need to understand where he learned not to trust experts who had never done the work. You need to understand what his father's death taught him about regulations written in comfortable offices. You need to know about the frozen mornings in Montana garages where a young mechanic learned that engineers design for perfect conditions while mechanics fix for real ones. You need to understand that Red's father drowned in his own lungs while company doctors said nothing could be done, and that Red had promised himself, standing at his father's grave in the snow, that he would never let regulations kill anyone again. But first, you need to go back to Butte, Montana, where the Anaconda Copper Mining Company owned everything and everyone, and where 10-year-old Red Callahan learned his first lesson about the difference between what manuals say should happen and what actually happens when metal gets cold. Red was born in 1922 in a company house on Mercury Street, 3 rooms for 6 people. Walls so thin you could hear the neighbors breathing at night, could track their lives by sound alone. The coughing, the arguments, the laughter that came less and less frequently as the years went on, and the mind took its toll on every family, in every house, on every street the company owned. His father, Patrick Callahan, worked 3,000 feet underground in the copper mines. Tunnels so narrow you had to crawl on hands and knees. Rock dust so thick it coated your lungs like paint. Every evening, Patrick came home covered in dust, the color of dried blood. He would stand in the tiny kitchen and cough for 20 minutes before he could eat dinner. Deep, rattling coughs that shook his whole body. Red's mother would watch her husband cough and say nothing. What was there to say? Every miner coughed. Every miner's wife listened to those coughs and knew what they meant. The company doctors called it occupational hazard, an acceptable cost of extracting copper from Montana rock. By the time Red was 14, his father's coughs had turned wet. By 15, they came with blood. By 16, Patrick Callahan was dying of silicosis, drowning slowly in lungs filled with rock dust and scar tissue. The company doctors said there was nothing to be done. They explained this with the patient tone of men who had explained it many times before to many other families in many other company houses. Silicosis, no treatment, no cure, just suffocation that took 8 months to complete what the mine had started 20 years earlier. Red watched his father die over that winter, watched him grow thinner as breathing became work, watched him struggle for air that would not come no matter how hard he gasped. The company sent flowers to the funeral. They did not send compensation. They did not acknowledge that maybe 20 years of breathing rock dust, 3,000 feet underground, might be something they bore responsibility for. At the graveside with snow falling on the cheap pine coffin, 16-year-old Red made himself two promises. He would never go underground. He would never trust men in offices who had never done the work to tell him how to do the work. Those promises would define everything that came after, would lead him to become a mechanic instead of a miner, would lead him to question every regulation that contradicted what he could see and touch and measure, would eventually lead him to modify his rifle in violation of direct orders because the manual was killing men, and Red had watched regulations kill his father. But that was years away. First, he had to learn his trade. Old Man Morrison ran a garage on East Park Street. Morrison was 60 years old and had been fixing engines since before the First World War. He believed that understanding metal was more important than reading manuals. Under Morrison's instruction, Red learned how oils behaved at different temperatures, learned which parts contracted in cold, learned which tolerances disappeared when mercury dropped below zero. Butte winters were brutal education. 20 below zero was common. 40 below happened often enough that people stopped remarking on it. Cars would not start. Engines seized. Transmissions failed. Drivers would come into Morrison's garage with vehicles that had worked fine the day before and now refused to turn over. Morrison would examine the engine, feel the oil on the dipstick, and tell Red what had gone wrong. Wrong weight oil for winter. Thickens in cold. Creates resistance. Engine cannot overcome it. Seizes. Simple as that. Red learned to diagnose problems by touch and sound. Learned the particular quality of grinding that meant metal was binding against metal without proper lubrication. Learned that oils specified for California summer would kill a Montana engine in January. Learned that manuals written by engineers who had never experienced real cold were worse than useless. They were dangerous. Morrison taught him a principle that Red would carry into war. Engineers design for perfect conditions. Mechanics fix for real conditions. The world is not perfect. Cold is real. Moisture is real. Dirt and mud are real. Any system that fails under real conditions is a bad system, no matter how beautifully it works in a laboratory. By 1942, Red was 20 years old and one of the best mechanics in Butte. He could diagnose an engine by listening to it idle, could tell you which bearing was failing by the pitch of the whine, could look at oil and tell you not just that it was the wrong weight, but exactly what would fail first because of it. Then Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th, 1941. Exactly 3 years before the morning, Red would crouch in a frozen foxhole with a seized rifle and 9 Germans advancing. Red enlisted the next day. His mother begged him not to go. She had lost her husband to corporate negligence and company doctors who said nothing could be done. She did not want to lose her son to war. But Red went anyway. He was young and angry and patriotic. He believed, despite everything his father's death had taught him, that the Army would be different, that the military would not let stupid regulations get good men killed. He was wrong, but he did not know that yet. Fort Benning, Georgia, in the summer of 1942 was hot and humid and unlike anything Red had experienced. The drill instructors issued him an M1 Garand rifle and a maintenance manual and told him this weapon would keep him alive if he took care of it properly. The manual specified lubricating oil preservative light, Army designation LP, standard issue, works in all temperatures, and apply liberally to all moving parts. Red read those words and thought about oils that worked in California but failed in Montana. Thought about what Morrison had taught him about engineers and perfect conditions. But he was 20 years old and new to the Army. He did not yet have the confidence to question regulations. So he applied the LP lubricant liberally to all moving parts, just like the manual said, just like every other soldier in his training platoon. In the Georgia summer, the rifles worked fine. In the English autumn, where they trained for the invasion, the rifles worked fine. It was not until November of 1944, when the 28th Infantry Division entered the Hurtgen Forest, that the rifles started to fail. By then, men were dying because of it. But Red did not enter the Hurtgen Forest alone. He entered with two men who would define the next month of his life. Two men whose deaths would break something inside him and force him to choose between following regulations and trusting what he knew about metal and cold. The first was Frank Murphy, 28 years old, Detroit, mechanic at the Ford plant before the war. Frank and Red had found each other during training, recognizing in each other the same mechanical understanding. They became inseparable. The garage crew, the other soldiers called them, sometimes with affection, sometimes with mockery. Frank was older, more confident, more willing to trust the system. He believed the Army knew what it was doing, believed that engineers with college degrees knew more than mechanics with grease under their fingernails. He became the older brother Red had never had, the mentor who taught him how to survive in the Army, how to navigate sergeants and regulations. Frank believed in the manual. Red wanted to believe in it too, wanted to think his father had been wrong about trusting experts, wanted to think the Army was different from the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. The second man was Johnny Blake, 19 years old, Shreveport, Louisiana, farm kid with an open face and easy smile. Johnny attached himself to Red like a younger brother, following him around asking questions about engines and oil and how things worked. Johnny carried a photograph of his little sister, Clara, 14 years old in the picture, standing in front of a house that needed paint, smiling at the camera. Johnny talked about Clara constantly, about how he was going to buy her a bicycle when he got home, how she had wanted one for 3 years, but the family could not afford it, how his first Army paycheck was going straight to that bicycle fund. Red liked Johnny. Everyone liked Johnny. He was impossible not to like. Earnest and kind and brave, in the way that young men are brave before they understand what courage costs. These were the men Red carried into the Hurtgen Forest on November 2nd, 1944. Frank Murphy, who trusted the system. Johnny Blake, who wanted to buy his sister a bicycle. And Red himself, trying to be a good soldier, trying to follow the manual, even as some part of him began to suspect the manual was wrong. The Hurtgen Forest was 70 square miles of hell, dense pine trees that blocked the sun, steep ravines where water collected and froze and collected again, mud deep enough to swallow a jeep. The weather was perfectly calibrated to destroy equipment, cold enough to freeze water, warm enough to create it constantly. 28 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Rain that turned to sleet, that turned back to rain without ever stopping. The trees were so thick that when artillery hit the canopy, it exploded into wooden shrapnel that rained down on troops below. The Germans had fortified every trail, every clearing, every approach. The 28th Infantry Division entered with 14,000 men. 6,000 became casualties. Many died from enemy fire. But a disturbing number died because their rifles would not work. Red first noticed the problem on November 8th. A soldier from another platoon came back from patrol with a rifle that would not fire. The bolt was sticky. The trigger pull felt wrong. The man had cleaned his weapon the night before, had applied LP lubricant per regulations, but something was not right. The armorer, Sergeant First Class Howard Pierce, inspected the rifle and pronounced it dirty. "Carbon buildup," Pierce said. "Clean it better." The soldier protested that he had cleaned it 3 times that week. Pierce quoted the manual. "LP lubricant works in all temperatures. Apply liberally to all moving parts. If your rifle fails, it is operator error." Red watched this exchange and said nothing. He was a corporal. Pierce was a sergeant, first class with 8 years of experience. Who was Red to question him? But that night, Red took his own rifle apart and examined the bolt. He could feel the resistance in the moving parts, could see how the LP lubricant had thickened in the cold, how it was mixing with carbon residue from firing and moisture from constant rain. He could see the paste forming in the gas cylinder, could predict exactly what would happen if this continued. He showed Frank Murphy. Frank examined his own rifle and found the same problem. They discussed it in the darkness of a damaged barn. "You ever see what happens when you use wrong lubricant?" Red asked. Frank nodded. "Machinery seizes. Breaks sometimes. I saw a hoist cable snap because the grease got too thick. Killed 3 men." "This is the same thing," Red said. LP oil is too heavy for this cold and wet, gets into the gas system, mixes with powder, and water turns to paste. Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then what do we do? Tell someone. Frank shook his head. Manual says LP works all temperatures. Pierce's career army. He will not listen to two corporals who fixed cars before the war. Someone needs to listen. This is going to get men killed. Maybe, Frank said, or maybe the engineers know something we do not. Maybe there is a reason for LP lubricant. Red wanted to argue, but the words stuck. He remembered his father coughing blood, remembered company doctors saying nothing could be done, remembered his promise never to trust experts who had never done the work. But Frank was his mentor, and maybe Frank was right. Maybe the Army engineers knew more than two mechanics. So Red said nothing. 4 days later, Johnny Blake died because of it. November 14th began like every morning in the Hurtgen. Cold, wet, miserable. Johnny's squad was assigned to reconnaissance patrol. 5 men moving through pine trees looking for German positions, trying not to get killed. Johnny was nervous that morning. His rifle had been sticky for 2 days. He mentioned it to Red the night before. "My bolt is not cycling smooth," Johnny said, showing Red the muddy photograph of Clara that he carried everywhere. "Think something is wrong with it?" Red examined the rifle. He could feel the resistance, could feel the paste forming in the gas system, could predict with mechanical certainty that this rifle would fail under use. "Did you clean it?" Red asked, even though he knew the answer. "3 times this week. Per the manual, just like Pierce says." "Should be fine," Red heard himself say. "Just keep it clean." Johnny smiled. "Thanks, Red. You always know about this stuff." Red watched Johnny walk away to join his patrol, watched him check his gear, adjust his helmet, joke with the other men. And Red said nothing about the rifle he knew would fail. Said nothing because he was scared. Scared of questioning regulations. Scared of being wrong. Scared of being like his father, who questioned company doctors and died anyway. At 11:30 that morning, Johnny Blake's patrol encountered Germans near a frozen stream. Johnny saw them first, brought his rifle up, squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. The firing pin was frozen by congealed LP lubricant mixed with carbon residue. Johnny tried to work the bolt manually, tried to chamber a fresh round. The bolt lugs were seized. The rifle that was supposed to keep him alive had become 8 pounds of useless metal. The German soldier who shot Johnny was 30 yards away. Professional, methodical. 3 rounds center mass. Johnny fell backward into the frozen stream and did not get back up. Red helped carry Johnny's body back to American lines. The photograph of Clara had fallen out during the carry. It landed face up in the mud. Clara's smile looked up at Red from the churned earth. Red picked up the photograph, wiped the mud away as best he could, and put it in his own pocket. He would carry it for the rest of his life. Johnny Blake was 19 years old. He died trying to make a rifle work that Army engineers had promised would work in all temperatures. He died because Red Callahan knew the rifle would fail and said nothing. That night, Red sat alone and held Johnny's photograph and made a new promise. No more silence. No more trusting manuals written by people who had never been cold. If regulations were killing men, Red would break the regulations, court-martial or not. But before Red could figure out what to do, more men had to die. Private Eddie Cortez died on November 15th. Rifle seized during a German counterattack. Shot twice while trying to clear the jam. 23 years old from El Paso. Bled out in the mud while his squad mates tried to save him. Corporal Mike Hendricks died on November 17th. His M1 fired once, then jammed so severely the armor had to disassemble it completely. Found the op rod covered in paste. The consistency of cold axle grease, the armorer noted. Hendricks died working the charging handle while a German shot him methodically. 3-round center mass, folded over his broken rifle. Sergeant Luis Rodriguez, automated on November 18th. Night patrol, rifle failure. Killed by the German who spotted the muzzle flash from his squad mate's working rifle. By November 20th, Red had watched 7 men die with seized rifles. The casualty rate for rifle malfunctions reached 14%. 14 men per 100 dying because their weapons failed. The number should have been 0. Red brought it up to Sergeant Wagner. "Sarge, these rifles are seizing. The LP oil is too thick for this cold and wet." Wagner checked the manual. "Says LP oil works all temperatures." Manual is wrong. I'm a mechanic. This lubricant is carbon heavy, gets into the gas system, mixes with powder, and water turns to paste. We need lighter oil. You an ordnance engineer now, Callahan numb. But I know how metal works in cold. This stuff is killing us. Take it up with the armorer. Red took it up with armorer Pierce. Pierce listened, nodded, pulled out the technical manual. Says right here, Callahan. LP oil, all moving parts. That is what we use. It is not working. 7 men are dead. Lubricant is within specification. If rifles malfunction, it is operator error. Tell your men to clean better. They are clean. The lubricant is wrong for these conditions. Pierce's expression hardened. Son, I have been an armorer 8 years. These manuals are written by engineers with college degrees. You are a corporal from Montana who fixed cars. I will trust the engineers. Red walked away. That night, he thought about his father. Company doctors, saying nothing could be done, trust the experts, we know better. His father drowning in his own lungs because nobody questioned the men with degrees. And then on November 25th, Frank Murphy died. It was Thanksgiving. Frank and Red were cleaning rifles in a damaged barn that morning. Frank brought up the modification idea. You still thinking about changing the lubrication every day? But court-martial, I have been thinking too. Maybe try lighter application of LP, not full rebuild. Red shook his head. Will not work. Need different oil entirely. Lighter petroleum base. Motor oil, yeah. But that is career-ending. Court-martial territory. Frank was quiet, but it would work. In Montana, motor oil saved engines in January. Should work here. Should, not certainty. Red met his eyes. No. But 7 dead is certainty. Frank made a decision. Let me try it first. I am older. No family. You have your mother and siblings, Frank. One of us needs to test it. Better me than you. Let me think. Give me 2 days. Okay. 2 days. That afternoon, Frank's squad went on routine patrol. Red stayed behind on cleaning duty. At 3 in the afternoon, the squad ran into a German ambush. Frank's rifle fired 3 times, then jammed. The op rod seized mid-cycle. Frank tried to clear it for 30 seconds. Worked the bolt desperately while Germans advanced. Red reached the position 10 minutes later with the relief squad. Found Frank folded over his M1 Garand. 3 bullet holes in his back. Died trying to make his rifle work. The rifle was still in his hands. Bolt partially open. Face frozen in frustration and fear. Red knelt beside Frank's body in the rain. Pried the rifle from dead hands. Examined the op rod. Covered in gray paste. LP lubricant plus carbon plus water. Red stood over Frank's body. I could have fixed this. I knew how. I stayed silent. He thought of his father. Stayed silent. Trusted experts died. He thought of Johnny. Stayed silent, trusted manual died. Now Frank. Stayed silent. Trusted regulations died. Red made his vow standing in that rain. No more silence. No more trusting manuals written by people who have never been cold. Frank, I am fixing this. Court-martial or not. I am done letting good men die because I am scared of officers. That night, November 25th, Red sat alone in the barn. Frank's rifle on a crate in front of him. Johnny's muddy photograph beside it. Mental count of the dead. 7 men. All because LP lubricant manual said works in all temperatures. Red began disassembling Frank's rifle, then his own. In the corner sat a jerry can of motor oil for the unit's Jeeps. Red stared at it. Engineers never spent Montana winter. Never watched engines die from wrong oil. Manual says court-martial for unauthorized modification. Manual also said LP works in all temperatures. Manual has killed 7 men. Red wrestled with 2 futures. If I am wrong, I destroy my rifle. Court-martial. Leavenworth. If I am right but stay silent, more men die. That is worse. Frank was going to test it for me. Now Frank is dead. I am the only one left who knows. Red stripped Frank's rifle completely, used a steel pick to scrape carbon from the gas cylinder. 40 minutes of cramping work in freezing cold. Then the forbidden act, motor oil, thin coating on bolt lugs, on OP rod rails, on hammer and trigger. Gas cylinder got microscopic film, almost dry. Special lubrication 1/10 what the manual specified. Red tested the action, chambered a round, ejected it, chambered another. 20 times. Perfect function, smoother than it had been in weeks. Then the doubt hit. What if motor oil destroys the gas system under fire? What if it fouls faster? What if the rifle explodes? Court-martial for sure. Maybe Leavenworth. And if I am right but say nothing while others die with LP oil, that is moral cowardice. Worse than prison. Red sat in darkness. Two types of guilt. Legal versus moral. He looked at his own rifle. Still assembled with LP oil. Tomorrow I modify mine. Tomorrow I find out if I am hero or criminal. Either way, I am done watching mechanics die because engineers never got cold. 12 days until December 7th. Until 9 Germans advance through trees. Until Red discovers whether his modification works or kills him. December 5th, 1944. 1:30 in the morning. The barn was dark except for a single candle that Red had shielded with his helmet to keep the light from showing through cracks in the damaged walls. Outside, sleet tapped against what remained of the roof. Inside, Red sat alone with his rifle and his fear. The rest of the platoon was sleeping or standing watch. Nobody knew what Red was doing. Nobody knew that in the next hour he would commit a crime that could send him to Leavenworth for 5 years, or save hundreds of American lives, or both. His M1 Garand lay completely disassembled on a wooden ammunition crate, every part coated in LP lubricant per Army regulations. Every part about to be cleaned dry and relubricated with motor oil in direct violation of those same regulations. Red had already modified Frank Murphy's rifle 2 weeks earlier, the night Frank died. That rifle sat hidden in Red's footlocker, wrapped in canvas, never fired. Red had been too afraid to test it, too afraid of what would happen if it exploded, too afraid of the court-martial that would follow if anyone discovered what he had done. But 7 men were dead now. 7 men whose faces Red saw every time he closed his eyes. Johnny Blake with his photograph of Clara. Frank Murphy folded over his broken rifle. 5 others whose names Red had learned only after they died. Tomorrow there would be more patrols, more contact with German forces, more rifles jamming in the cold, more men dying because they trusted a manual written by engineers who had never spent a winter in combat. Red could not watch another man die. Not when he knew how to fix the problem. Not when the solution was sitting right there in the corner of the barn in a jerrycan marked motor oil for Jeep engines. He began with the steel pick, scraping carbon buildup out of the gas cylinder. The carbon was hard as stone baked onto the metal by hundreds of rounds fired. It came off in tiny black flakes that drifted onto the crate like snow. Red's hands cramped from the cold and the repetitive motion. 40 minutes of scraping, 40 minutes of thinking about what he was about to do. The legal consequences were clear. Destruction of government property, unauthorized modification of military equipment, failure to follow proper maintenance procedures. Each charge carried potential prison time. Together they could mean 5 years in Leavenworth. The moral consequences were equally clear. If Red did nothing, men would continue to die with jammed rifles. If he modified his own rifle and it worked, he could teach others, could spread the knowledge, could prevent more Johnnies and Franks. But if he was wrong, if the motor oil fouled the gas system or caused the rifle to explode, Red would be responsible. Would be the mechanic from Montana who thought he knew better than Army engineers and got men killed because of his arrogance. Red finished scraping the carbon and set down the steel pick. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from fear, from the weight of the decision he was about to make. In the corner of the barn sat the jerry can, motor oil, 10 weight. The same oil Morrison had used in Montana winters to keep engines running when heavier oils would have frozen them solid. Red poured a small amount into his canteen cup. The oil moved easily even in the cold, flowed like water compared to the thick LP lubricant that became paste when mixed with carbon and moisture. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once Red applied motor oil to his rifle, there would be no hiding what he had done. The smell was different. The appearance was different. Any armorer who inspected the weapon would know immediately that unauthorized lubricant had been used. Red thought about his father, Patrick Callahan, dying in a company house while doctors said nothing could be done, drowning in his own lungs because nobody questioned the experts. Red thought about Johnny Blake, 19 years old with a photograph of his sister and dreams of buying her a bicycle. dead in a frozen stream because his rifle jammed and Red had said nothing. Red thought about Frank Murphy, mentor and friend, folded over a broken rifle because he had trusted the manual one time too many. He picked up a small rag, dipped it in motor oil, and began to apply the thinnest possible coating to the bolt lugs. The metal felt different under his fingers as he worked, smoother. The motor oil spread evenly, creating a microscopic film that would prevent metal-on-metal contact without the thickness that caused LP lubricant to form paste in the cold. Red worked methodically. Up rod rails, hammer, trigger sear. Every surface where metal moved against metal received the same treatment. Just enough oil to lubricate, not enough to foul. The gas cylinder required special attention. This was where most jams originated. Too much oil in the gas cylinder would foul the action when the rifle fired. Too little would allow carbon to build up and seize the piston. Red aimed for the absolute minimum, a molecular layer, almost dry to the touch. He held the gas cylinder up to the candlelight, could barely see the oil on the metal. Perfect. That was exactly what he wanted. Enough to prevent seizing, not enough to cause problems. Total lubrication perhaps 1/10 of what the manual specified, 1/10 of what every other rifle in the Hurtgen forest carried, 1/10 of what was killing men. Red reassembled the rifle. 8 minutes. His hands knew the weapon intimately now after months of daily maintenance. Every part fit together with the precision of American manufacturing. The M1 Garand was a beautiful design, semi-automatic, gas-operated, 8-round in block clip. When properly maintained, it was the finest infantry rifle in the world. The question was whether motor oil counted as proper maintenance. Red worked the bolt. It cycled smoothly, smoother than it had been in weeks. The resistance was gone, the grinding was gone. Just clean mechanical action. Metal sliding on metal with the perfect amount of lubrication. He pulled the trigger. The hammer fell with a clean snap. He flipped the safety. It engaged with precision. He chambered a round from a clip, ejected it, chambered another. Did this 20 times in the cold barn, working the action until he was satisfied. The rifle ran like a sewing machine, smooth, fast, reliable. Then the doubt arrived in force. What if he was wrong? What if motor oil destroyed the gas system under sustained fire? What if it fouled after 10 rounds or 20 rounds or 50? What if the rifle exploded in his hands during combat, killing him, and anyone nearby Red would be court-martialed for certain? Destruction of government property. Negligence leading to death. They might execute him for it, and if other soldiers had copied his modification because he had taught them, those deaths would be on Red's conscience too. But there was another calculation. A simpler one. 7 men were already dead. Dead because they had followed regulations. Dead because they had trusted a manual that promised LP lubricant would work in all temperatures. Red could follow those same regulations. Could strip the motor oil off his rifle and reapply LP lubricant. Could go back to being a good soldier who did what he was told. And then he could watch more men die. Could carry more photographs of sisters who would never get their bicycles. Could help carry more bodies of mentors who had trusted the system. That was the real choice. Risk court-martial or guarantee more deaths. Red sat in the darkness with his rifle across his knees. Outside, the sleet continued to fall. Inside, a single candle burned low. Tomorrow there would be patrols. Tomorrow there would be an attack with German forces. Tomorrow Red would discover if he was a hero or a criminal. He made his decision. He would tell no one. Would not advertise what he had done. But when his rifle worked and others failed, when the question came about why his weapon functioned perfectly, while the rest of the squad struggled with jammed bolts and seized triggers, then Red would teach them, would show them what he had done, would spread the knowledge that could save lives. If that meant court-martial, so be it. Red had watched his father die for trusting experts, had watched Johnny die for following regulations, had watched Frank die for believing the manual. He would not let more men die for the same reasons. Red hid his rifle under his bedroll, blew out the candle, lay down in the darkness, and did not sleep. 2 days until December 7th. 2 days until 9 German soldiers would advance through the trees, and Red would discover if motor oil worked or killed him. December 7th arrived cold and wet like every morning in the Hurtgen forest. Red's squad had pulled patrol duty, forward positions near the German lines. They left camp at 6 in the morning and reached their assigned foxholes by 6:30. The holes were half filled with icy water, despite the pine branches they had lined them with. The rain had turned to sleet at 3 a.m. and back to rain by dawn. Red's rifle had been exposed to moisture for 11 straight hours. If the motor oil modification was going to fail, this was exactly the condition that would reveal it. Cold, wet, sustained exposure. The perfect test. The worst test. By 8 a.m., Red's hands were numb. His uniform was soaked through. The temperature hovered at 30 degrees. Not cold enough for the water in the foxholes to freeze. Cold enough for the LP lubricant in standard rifles to thicken into paste. Red kept checking his rifle, working the bolt, testing the trigger. Everything felt smooth. The motor oil had not thickened, had not congealed. The weapon was ready. At 8:15 a.m., the German attack came. No warning. One moment the forest was quiet except for the sound of rain on pine needles. The next moment, 9 German soldiers in winter camouflage were advancing through the trees in a coordinated assault. Red's squad was 5 men: Bobby Garrett, Ricardo Torres, Mike Wilson, Tommy Chen, who was wounded from the previous day and could not fight effectively. That left 4 men with rifles against 9 Germans with working weapons. Bobby Garrett fired first. His M1 discharged once. The sound was loud in the cold morning air. Then nothing. Red heard Garrett cursing, heard the distinctive click, click, click of a soldier trying to work a frozen bolt. Ricardo Torres opened fire. 3 shots. Then his rifle jammed. The bolt locked back on a round that would not chamber. Red could see the brass case stuck halfway into the receiver. Torres pulled at the charging handle desperately. The bolt would not move. The Germans advanced. They moved with the confidence of professionals who had learned that American rifles jammed in winter weather. They used proper infantry tactics, bounds and overwatch, 3 firing while 6 advanced, then switching, getting closer with every movement. 40 yards became 35. 35 became 30. Red brought his M1 to his shoulder. His heart was pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. Either the motor oil worked or Red died. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. The recoil pushed against his shoulder. The brass case ejected in a golden arc. The bolt traveled backward, stripping a fresh round from the clip, chambering it, locking into battery. The entire cycle took a fraction of a second. No hesitation, no grinding, no resistance. Just smooth mechanical precision, exactly as the rifle had been designed to operate. Red shifted his aim, fired again. A German soldier on the left went down. The action cycled perfectly. Bolt back, round out, fresh round in, bolt forward, ready to fire. Red could feel the difference. Every other time he had fired his rifle in the Hurtgen forest, there had been slight hesitation in the action. A tiny fraction of resistance as the bolt moved through thick lubricant and carbon paste. Now there was nothing. Just instant response. Pull trigger, rifle fires, bolt cycles ready again. He fired 3 more rounds in rapid succession. 2 more Germans fell. The rest scrambled for cover behind the thick pine trees. Garrett and Torres were still fighting their jammed rifles. Garrett had managed to clear his jam and fired twice before it seized again. Torres had given up on his rifle completely and was reaching for his knife, preparing for close quarters combat if the Germans reached their position. The Germans tried to flank. 4 moved left through the trees, 2 moved right, 3 stayed in position to provide covering fire. Standard Wehrmacht infantry tactics. They thought they were facing a broken squad. Easy targets. Red tracked the flanking movement on the left. The Germans moved in professional bounds. 1 soldier advancing while 3 covered. Then switch. They were 60 yards away, then 50, then 40. Red let them close to 30 yards. Then he opened fire. The M1 Garand in semi-automatic mode fires as fast as you can pull the trigger. A trained rifleman can maintain a practical rate of about 40 rounds per minute. Red was a trained rifleman, and his rifle worked. He fired 8 rounds in 10 seconds. The distinctive ping of the en-bloc clip ejecting echoed through the forest. Red reloaded in 2 seconds. Muscle memory, thumbed the clip into the receiver, let the bolt slam forward. 8 more rounds ready. The Germans on the left flank stopped advancing. 2 were definitely down. Not moving, one was crawling behind a tree, leaving a blood trail in the sleet-covered ground. The fourth had gone to ground completely. Red shifted his aim to the right flank. 4 more rounds into their position. He saw one German stumble backward, hit in the shoulder. Another dropped and did not move. 15 seconds of sustained fire. 15 rounds expended. 5 Germans down or wounded. 3 pinned behind cover. The 3 Germans who had been providing covering fire broke and ran. They had signed up to fight Americans with jammed rifles, not Americans with weapons that actually worked. Red tracked the first runner through the pine trees, moving target at 70 yards, partially obscured by branches and sleet. He led the target, squeezed the trigger, missed, adjusted, fired again. The German fell. He swung to the second runner, fired twice, hit once. The German kept running, but his gait changed. Leg wound, not fatal. He would make it back to German lines. The third German made it to cover before Red could acquire him properly. Red's rifle was empty. He reloaded his last clip. 8 rounds remaining. The fight was over. 5 Germans dead, 1 wounded and crawling away, 3 retreated. The attack had been broken. 23 rounds fired in approximately 40 seconds. 0 malfunctions. Perfect function from a rifle that should have jammed within the first 5 rounds based on every other M1 Garand's performance in the Hurtgen Forest. Bobby Garrett was staring at Red's rifle like it was a holy relic. "How is your weapon still working?" Red looked at his M1. Smoke rose from the barrel. The wood stock was slick with rain. The action was coated with mud spatter from muzzle blast hitting wet ground. The rifle should have jammed 10 rounds ago, 20 rounds ago, should have seized like every other weapon in the cold and wet. "I do not know," Red lied. They held position for another hour, waiting for German reinforcement that never came. Red kept his rifle ready, but the forest stayed quiet except for the rain. His weapon cycled smoothly every time he checked it. The motor oil had not fouled, had not caused problems, had worked exactly as Red had predicted it would. When they finally pulled back to company lines, Sergeant Wagner was waiting at the command post. "Heard you got into contact. What happened?" 9 Germans. "They retreated. We got 5 confirmed kills. Your squad's weapon status, Ert and Torres both had jams. Wilson was already wounded from yesterday. Could not fight effectively. It was mostly me." Wagner picked up Red's rifle, worked the bolt. It cycled smoothly. He peered into the receiver, examining the mechanism. It was filthy from sustained fire. Carbon buildup, powder residue, mud spatter, but the action moved freely. "You do something different with maintenance," Callahan. Red met his eyes. "Just cleaned it good, Sergeant." Wagner held his gaze for a long moment. Red could see him processing the implications. If Red had modified the rifle in violation of regulations, that was court-martial territory. But if Red's rifle was the only one that worked when every other M1 in the forest was jamming, maybe regulations were not working. "Show me," Wagner said quietly. "Tonight after chow, show me exactly what you did." Word spread fast in combat. By evening, 6 riflemen from other squads had shown up at Red's position. They had heard that his rifle worked, had heard that he knew something. Red looked at Wagner. Wagner nodded. "Teach them." That night, Red gave his first lesson. 14 men gathered in the barn by candlelight. Red demonstrated on his rifle, explained in simple terms what needed to be done. Strip the rifle completely. Remove all carbon buildup. This is the critical part. Use a steel pick. Scrape until the gas cylinder is clean, until the bolt lugs shine, until there is no carbon residue anywhere. Then the forbidden part. Apply the thinnest possible coating of motor oil instead of LP lubricant. Not thick, thin, almost dry, just enough to prevent metal-on-metal contact. Private Hernandez raised his hand. "Where do we get motor oil?" "Supply has jerry cans for the Jeeps. Motor oil 10 weight. Use that." Hernandez looked worried. "Armorer is going to have our asses if he finds out." "Armorer does not have to know," Red said. "You want a working rifle, or you want to follow regulations?" The question hung in the air. Every man in that barn had watched someone die with a jammed rifle. Every man knew the choice being offered. Risk court-martial or risk death. Hernandez took the jerry can of motor oil. So did Private Davidson, Corporal Meyer, Private First Class Wong, Sergeant Lewis. 9 others whose names Red did not catch in the darkness. They worked by candlelight. in barns and cellars and foxholes across the American positions, stripping weapons down to component parts, scraping carbon with steel picks until their hands cramped, applying forbidden lubricant to mechanisms that the Army said required LP oil. No paperwork, no official authorization, just soldiers trying not to die. That night, for the first time since Johnny Blake died, Red slept soundly. He had kept his promise, had refused to stay silent, had taken the knowledge he possessed and shared it. If the Army wanted to court-martial him for it, so be it. At least no more men would die with Red's knowledge trapped inside his head by fear. December 9th. B Company got into heavy contact near Grosshow. 15 riflemen with motor oil modified M1s. Their rifles worked flawlessly. The rest of the company's rifles jammed at the usual rate, 14%. 1 in 7 rifles failing when they were needed most. The disparity was so obvious that Captain William Foster noticed. He called Red to company headquarters that evening. Foster was 31 years old, Philadelphia, lawyer in civilian life. He had been commanding B Company for 7 months, had written 43 letters home to families of soldiers killed in action. 14 of those deaths had involved weapon malfunctions. Corporal Callahan Foster said, "I am told you have been modifying rifles." Red stood at attention. "Teaching better cleaning techniques, sir. Using unauthorized lubricants." Red said nothing. There was nothing to say. Either Foster would court-martial him or he would not. "The manual specifies LP lubricant," Foster continued. "Motor oil violates maintenance protocols. That is destruction of government property. Court-martial offense." "Yes, sir." "How many men have you taught this to?" "I do not know, sir." Word spreads. Foster leaned back in his chair. "Your rifle fired 23 rounds without malfunction in conditions where every other M1 jammed within 5 rounds. That is documented. Yesterday, 15 rifles in my company performed flawlessly while the rest failed at usual rate. Those 15 all belonged to men you instructed. Also documented." Red waited. This was the moment. Prison or permission. No middle ground. "I should court-martial you," Foster said. "That is what regulations say. But regulations also say LP lubricant works in all temperatures, and that is clearly false." Foster stood, walked to the window. Rain was falling again. Always raining in the Hurtgen. "So I am faced with a choice," Foster said. "Punish a soldier for violating a manual that is getting men killed, or pretend I did not notice and let you keep teaching." He turned back to Red. "Keep teaching. Tell every man in B Company, but if division asks, I never authorized this." "Understood." "Yes, sir." "Understood." Dismissed. And Callahan, "Thank you." Red walked back to his squad area in a daze. An officer had just given him permission to break regulations. Had acknowledged that the manual was wrong, had chosen soldiers over protocols. This was bigger than Red now. Officers were looking the other way, were actively encouraging the spread of unauthorized modifications. The motor oil revolution was no longer one mechanic's crime. It was becoming policy without ever becoming official. The modifications spread like disease through a crowded trench. Soldier to soldier, squad to squad, company to company. By December 12th, Red had personally instructed 47 riflemen. By December 15th, word had reached 3 other companies in the regiment. By December 18th, armorers were finding motor oil residue during inspections and quietly saying nothing. The network was purely organic. No official channels, no paperwork trail, just knowledge passing from one cold, wet soldier to another. "Do you want your rifle to work? Let me show you what the mechanic from Montana figured out." Red became something of a prophet. Men sought him out. "You are the one who figured out the motor oil. Can you show me?" Red taught them all. Always mentioned Johnny Blake and Frank Murphy. Always said this is for the men who died with jammed rifles. By December 20th, division headquarters noticed. Colonel Raymond Mitchell, division ordnance officer, ordered an investigation. Motor oil was disappearing from supply faster than expected. Rifles were coming through maintenance with unauthorized lubricant. Someone was responsible. The investigation went nowhere. Every soldier questioned claimed to have learned the technique from someone else. The paper trail led in circles. Sergeants claimed ignorance. Company commanders expressed surprise. Battalion staff suggested it was organic development among frontline troops. Mitchell could not court-martial an entire division. could not ignore the statistics. Weapon malfunction rates had dropped from 14% to 3% in units using motor oil. That was an 80% reduction. Hundreds of lives saved. On December 27th, Mitchell made a phone call to Aberdeen Proving Ground, requested they evaluate motor oil as substitute lubricant for M1 Garand in extreme cold weather conditions. The engineers were skeptical. LP lubricant had been extensively tested, had been approved for all temperatures. Motor oil was designed for engines, not precision firearms. Using automotive lubricants in weapon systems violated fundamental ordnance principles, but they agreed to test it anyway. 3 weeks until the results came back. 3 weeks until the Army would officially admit that a corporal from Montana who fixed cars knew more than all their engineers combined. 3 weeks until motor oil maintenance became doctrine instead of crime. But Red did not wait for official approval. By January 1945, an estimated 40% of M1 Garands in the European theater were being maintained with motor oil. The modification had spread to units that had never been near the Hurtgen forest. Word traveled by replacement soldiers, by letters home, by the simple fact that rifles maintained with motor oil worked and rifles maintained with LP lubricant jammed. Statistical analysis told the story. November 1944, before the motor oil modification, the 28th Infantry Division reported rifle malfunction rates of 14% during combat. January 1945, after widespread adoption, the malfunction rate dropped to 3%. Conservative estimate is credited the modification with preventing 500 to 700 weapon-related casualties in 1st Army alone between December 1944 and March 1945. The German perspective was harder to document, but intercepted radio traffic told part of the story. Wehrmacht intelligence reports noted significant improvement in American rifle reliability. German soldiers who had grown accustomed to American weapons jamming in winter conditions found that advantage disappearing. One report from a Wehrmacht battalion commander captured near the Rhine noted that American infantry weapons now functioned as reliably as German weapons, eliminating the tactical advantage Wehrmacht forces had enjoyed during extended winter combat. Red Callahan had changed the war, one rifle at a time, one cold, wet soldier at a time, teaching the knowledge his father had given him about oils and cold, teaching what Morrison had taught him about engineers and real conditions, teaching what 7 dead men had paid for with their lives. And through it all, Red carried Johnny Blake's photograph, carried the weight of the men who had died before he found the courage to break the rules, carried the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing meant court-martial, that sometimes saving lives meant committing crimes. The Army would never thank him officially, but the men whose rifles worked knew, the men who came home to their families knew, and that Red thought was enough. January 18, 1945, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. 3 engineers in white coats stood in a testing facility watching 10 M1 Garand rifles being prepared for sustained fire tests. 5 rifles had been maintained with LP lubricant per Army regulations. 5 rifles had been maintained with 10-weight automotive motor oil in violation of those same regulations. The engineers were skeptical. One of them, a man named Richardson, who had designed lubrication specifications for the Ordnance Department, was particularly dismissive. Motor oil is for engines, he told his colleagues. Using automotive lubricants in precision firearms violates every principle of weapons maintenance. But Colonel Mitchell had ordered the tests. And when a division ordnance officer requested evaluation based on field reports of dramatically improved reliability, engineers conducted the tests even if they believed the results were predetermined. The temperature in the testing chamber was set to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. High moisture was introduced to simulate the conditions reported from the Hurtgen forest. Each rifle would fire 500 rounds. Malfunctions would be documented. Gas systems would be examined. Conclusions would be drawn. The tests took 3 days. When they were complete, Richardson stared at the results for a long time before he signed his name to the report. Motor oil, specifically 10-weight automotive motor oil, outperforms LP lubricant in temperatures between 28 and 35 degrees Fahrenheit when combined with high moisture conditions. The lighter viscosity prevents carbon paste formation in the gas cylinder. Minimal application reduces fouling. Rifle function is unimpaired and possibly improved. The report concluded with a recommendation for immediate field trials. Then someone added a note. Field trials are unnecessary. Modification has already been adopted organically by an estimated 40% of M1 Garands in European theater. Colonel Mitchell read the report 3 times, called his aide into the office. A corporal from Montana was right. Our engineers were wrong. What do we do? Sir Mitchell stared at the document for a long moment. We quietly change the manual. We do not admit we were wrong. We simply issue new lubrication specifications and pretend this was always the plan. And the corporal who figured it out. Mitchell shook his head. If we recognize him officially, we admit the old manual was killing soldiers. Better to let this become standard procedure without attribution. Better to let history forget how we got here. By March 1945, motor oil maintenance for the M1 Garand had spread across every theater of war. Europe, Pacific, anywhere American soldiers fought in cold or wet conditions. The modification was being taught at replacement training centers. Armorers were quietly stockpiling motor oil alongside LP lubricant. Officers were looking the other way. The statistics told a story that official reports would never fully acknowledge. Rifle malfunction rates had dropped from 14% to 3%, an 80% reduction. Conservative estimates suggested that 500 to 700 American casualties had been prevented in First Army alone between December 1944 and March 1945. German intelligence noticed. Wehrmacht reports from the final months of the war repeatedly mentioned that American rifles now function as reliably as German weapons. The tactical advantage that winter weather had provided to German forces, the advantage of bolt-action rifles that worked in cold while American semi-automatics jammed, had disappeared. Japanese forces encountered the same phenomenon. American riflemen on Okinawa facing similar high moisture conditions were maintaining weapons with motor oil by March 1945. Japanese after-action reports noted American weapons functioning with unusual reliability despite conditions that should have favored bolt-action rifles. The modification had gone global without ever becoming official. Soldier teaching soldier. Mechanic teaching mechanic. Knowledge spreading through the ranks faster than any official directive could have moved. And through it all, Thomas Callahan kept his head down. Taught men who asked, helped squads that struggled, carried Johnny Blake's photograph in his breast pocket and Frank Murphy's memory in his heart. Red never received official recognition for the innovation. His service record made no mention of it. When the Distinguished Service Cross arrived in March 1945, the citation was for actions on December 7th. Captain Foster pinned the medal on Red's chest while 200 soldiers stood in formation on a muddy field in Germany. The chaplain read the citation, for extraordinary heroism in combat against enemy forces. Corporal Callahan engaged and eliminated multiple enemy soldiers while under fire demonstrating exceptional marksmanship and tactical awareness. His actions resulted in preservation of Allied lives and tactical advantage. No mention of rifle modification, no mention of motor oil, no mention of the 700 lives saved by a mechanic who questioned a manual. After the ceremony, Foster leaned close and whispered, "You know what this is really for." "Do I, sir?" "You saved 700 lives, but we cannot say that officially." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Red thought about his father, Patrick Callahan, dying while the Anaconda Copper Mining Company would not admit their tunnels were killing miners. "My father died because a company would not admit a mistake." Army cannot admit mistake either. Foster's expression was pained. "I am sorry, Callahan. Do not be sir. The men know that is enough." Red was promoted to sergeant in January 1945. Standard progression. No special commendation. No technical innovation award. That night, Wagner found Red cleaning his rifle, the rifle that had started everything. "Frank and Johnny would be proud," Wagner said. "Seeing you make sergeant." "They would see more than that," Red replied quietly. "They would see 700 men who went home because of motor oil." Most soldiers who used the modification never learned Red's name. The story had spread so organically that the original source was lost. Some mechanic in the 28th Division, guy from Montana who knew about cold. The specifics disappeared into the fog of war and rumor. Red preferred it that way. Less attention meant fewer questions. Fewer questions meant less chance of some officer deciding that maybe this court-martial should have happened after all. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. Red was in Germany with occupation forces. teaching new replacements, motor oil maintenance. Standard procedure now, he told them, even if the manual still officially says LP lubricant. The young soldiers did not understand why this was significant. They had not watched men die with jammed rifles, had not carried their friends' bodies back through frozen forests. Red thought about Frank Murphy. Frank, we changed the Army, just took 700 deaths first. November 1945. The Army offered Red a position as instructor at Fort Benning, teaching rifle maintenance to new recruits, teaching the motor oil modification that had saved so many lives. Sergeant Callahan, the recruiting officer, said, "The Army needs men like you." Red looked at the man, looked at the uniform, looked at the offer of steady employment and recognition and the chance to keep teaching. Army had men like Frank Murphy, Red said quietly, like Johnny Blake. Army got them killed with a manual that was wrong. I have done my part. Someone else's turn. The officer tried to argue. Red cut him off. I am going home. The train from New York to Montana took 3 days. Red sat by the window and watched America pass. Farmland, small towns, mountains. The country his father had come to seeking a better life. The country Johnny Blake had died defending. The country that would never know what Red had done to keep its sons alive. Red thought about the 2,000 men estimated to be alive because of motor oil maintenance. Men who would marry and have children and build lives in the decades after the war. Men whose families would never know that a mechanic from Butte had questioned a manual and refused to stay silent. That was fine. Red had not done it for recognition, had done it for Frank, for Johnny, for 7 men whose deaths had taught him that sometimes regulations kill and sometimes breaking rules saves lives. Butte looked exactly as Red had left it. Company houses on Mercury Street, the mine entrances scarring the hillsides, Morrison's garage still standing on East Park Street. His sister still lived in the family house. 3 rooms, thin walls, everything the same except the people who were gone. Red slept on the couch for 2 months while looking for work. The copper mines were hiring, same job his father had done, same 3,000 feet underground, same rock dust that would eventually fill lungs and kill slowly. Red had promised himself at 16 that he would never go underground. He kept that promise. He found work at Anderson's garage on East Park Street, fixing cars and trucks for miners and railroad workers. The work was familiar. Cold mornings, frozen engines, drivers who had used wrong oil and wrecked their transmissions. Red fixed them all without judgment. Use 10 weight in winter, he would tell them. Trust me, none of them knew why he was so insistent about oil weight. None of them knew he had saved 700 lives over the same issue. In 1947, Red met Helen Morrison at a church social. She was a teacher at Lincoln Elementary, quiet woman with kind eyes. On their first date over coffee on Park Street, Helen asked if he wanted to talk about the war. No, Red said. Okay, Helen replied. Red thought he could love her for that alone, for not pressing, for understanding that some doors needed to stay closed. They married in June 1947, bought a small house on Utah Avenue, walking distance from Anderson's garage, had 3 children by 1952, Tommy Jr., Patrick named after Red's father, Sarah. Red never talked about the war. His children knew their father had been a soldier, knew he had medals in a box in the attic, did not know details and did not ask. Helen protected that silence, understood that some wounds healed better in quiet. Every year on December 7th, the phone would ring. Sometimes it was Wagner, sometimes Torres, sometimes Garrett. They would talk about weather, about families, about work, about anything except that morning in the Hurtgen forest when 9 Germans advanced and only Red's rifle worked. They did not need to talk about it. They had been there. That was enough. Red founded Callahan Automotive Services in 1953. A small shop, never made him wealthy, provided comfortable stability. He coached Little League Baseball, was active in the church. To his neighbors, he was simply a mechanic and a veteran. They did not know about December 7th, 1944, did not know about motor oil and 700 lives. The nightmares came less frequently as years passed, but never stopped completely. Red would wake sometimes in darkness, gasping, seeing Johnny Blake fall in a frozen stream, seeing Frank Murphy folded over a broken rifle. Helen would hold him and say nothing, and that was exactly what Red needed. In 1967, a letter arrived on official Army letterhead. The United States Army Sniper School at Fort Benning requested consultation regarding position concealment and weapons maintenance in adverse conditions. Would Mr. Callahan be available for a brief visit? Red's first instinct was to decline. He had put the war behind him, did not want to dredge up memories that had finally begun to fade. Then Ricardo Torres called. Torres was a major, now a retired, living in El Paso. Danny, they are using your modification. Motor oil maintenance. It is standard now. They manufacture it proper, but it is still your idea. You should see what you started. Red agreed to go, told Helen it would be a short trip. She smiled and kissed him and said nothing about the tension she saw on his shoulders. Fort Benning in 1967 was modern. Sophisticated equipment, professional instructors, but the fundamentals remained the same. Young men learning to shoot, learning patience and precision. The instructor cadre gave Red a tour, showed him motor oil being issued alongside traditional lubricants, showed him the training manual that credited the innovation to battlefield adaptation by unnamed personnel. North African Theater, 1943. Wrong theater, Red thought. Wrong year. But close enough. If they knew it started with me stealing motor oil from a Jeep and committing court-martial offenses, Red told Torres they would probably rescind the whole program. Torres laughed. They would probably give you a medal, then court-martial you, then give you another medal. Red gave one lecture to 40 instructors, all experienced combat veterans, all teaching the next generation. The topic was innovation under constraint, problem-solving in field conditions, trusting your knowledge when manuals fail you. Red did not mention the Hurtgen Forest by name, did not mention Johnny Blake or Frank Murphy or 700 Lives. Just talked about how mechanics think differently than engineers, how real conditions matter more than perfect conditions. At the end, 40 men stood and applauded. One young instructor approached afterward. Sir, did you serve? Yes. North Africa and Europe, 43 through 45. What unit, sir? Red smiled slightly. I would have to shoot you if I told you. The instructor laughed, thinking it was a joke. Red walked away before the man could ask more questions. On the flight home, Red stared out at clouds and thought about strange circles. The system he had built in desperation had become standard. His innovation, born from watching friends die, had been adopted wholesale. The military that had nearly court-martialed him now taught his methods to every recruit. But none of that changed the fundamental truth. 7 men had died before Red found courage to break rules. Johnny Blake would never buy his sister a bicycle. Frank Murphy would never go home to Detroit. And Red would carry their photographs until the day he died. Red lived 22 more years after that visit to Fort Benning. Quiet years, good years. He watched his children grow and marry and give him grandchildren. Retired from the garage at 65. Took Helen on trips they had always planned but never gotten around to. He lived as the doctors had told him decades earlier, learning to function with wounds that never fully healed. On June 14, 1987, Thomas Callahan died of a heart attack in Anderson's garage. He was 65 years old. He was working under a car when it happened, surrounded by tools and oil stains and the smell of gasoline. He died doing what he loved. Like his father had died in the mines, Red died in a garage, but on his own terms, above ground, keeping the promise he had made at 16. The funeral was held on June 18th at St. Patrick's Catholic Church. 60 people attended, family, friends, former customers from the garage. The obituary in the Montana Standard was 3 paragraphs. Thomas Red Callahan, 65, mechanic and business owner, died June 14th at Anderson's garage. He is survived by his wife, Helen, children Tommy Jr. Patrick and Sarah, and 7 grandchildren. Callahan served in the United States Army during World War II, earning the Distinguished Service Cross for Valor in the European theater. Services will be held Thursday at St. Patrick's Church. Nothing about rifles, nothing about motor oil, nothing about 700 lives saved. Just 3 paragraphs in a local newspaper that most people would not read and fewer would remember. Helen donated Red's footlocker to the Montana Historical Society in 1988. The contents included discharge papers, the Distinguished Service Cross citation photographs from Germany, a worn copy of Field Manual 23-5 for the M1 Garand, and a small notebook with handwritten maintenance procedures. The footlocker sat in the archive for 15 years before anyone looked at it closely. In 2003, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was researching World War II weapons maintenance for a book on military logistics. She was working through the Montana Historical Society archive when she found Red's notebook. The diagram showed proper lubrication points for an M1 Garand. But the lubricant specified was not LP oil. It was lightweight petroleum distillate, automotive motor oil 10 weight, application minimal coating all moving parts, gas cylinder near dry molecular film only. On the last page in Red's handwriting was a note. For Frank Murphy and Johnny Blake. They would have figured this out too. Mitchell cross-referenced with Army Ordnance reports from 1945, found the Aberdeen Proving Ground evaluation of motor oil, found the statistics showing 80% reduction in rifle malfunctions, found the estimates of 500 to 700 casualties prevented. "This is it," she said aloud in the empty archive room. "This is the source." She traced the modification back to December 1944 Hurtgen Forest, found surviving members of the 28th Infantry Division. Most were dead. Ricardo Torres was still alive at 79, living in El Paso. Mitchell called him. "Mr. Torres, I am researching the motor oil modification for M1 rifles. Did you know a Thomas Callahan?" Red Torres said immediately. "Red Callahan. Yeah, I knew him. Served with him in the Hurtgen. His rifle worked when ours jammed. Saved my life, probably. Why, he invented the motor oil modification." Long pause. "Yeah, I know. We all knew. Red figured it out. Taught us. Did he ever get recognized for that?" "No," Mitchell said. "That is why I am calling." Another long pause. "That is wrong. That is just wrong." Mitchell contacted Tommy Callahan, Jr., Red's eldest son, age 56. "Mr. Callahan, did your father ever mention modifying rifles in World War II?" "No. Dad never talked much about the war." Mitchell sent her full report. "Your father invented a modification that saved 500 to 700 lives, changed United States Army maintenance doctrine, and he was never recognized." Tommy Jr. read the report twice, called his mother, called his siblings. They gathered at Helen's house, the same house on Utah Avenue where Red had raised them. Helen was 78 now. She read the report slowly. When she finished, her hands were shaking. "Your father saved 700 men, Helen said. He never told us." "Why not?" Patrick asked. "Because he did it for them," Helen replied. "Not for glory. That was your father. Fix what is broken. Do not brag about it." In 2004, Mitchell published her findings, The Motor Oil Modification, Organic Innovation in World War II. Military history journals picked up the story. The Discovery Channel produced a documentary. Red's family was interviewed. "We had no idea," they said again and again. Fort Benning created a small exhibit. Field innovations that changed doctrine. An M1 Garand, a can of motor oil, a copy of Red's notebook, a photograph of Sergeant Callahan at age 22 in Germany holding his rifle. The plaque read Sergeant Thomas Red Callahan, 28th Infantry Division. December 1944, invented motor oil modification for M1 Garand. Reduced weapon malfunction rate 78%. Estimated 500 to 700 casualties prevented. Became standard doctrine, 1946. Modern military rifles use synthetic lubricants that avoid the problems LP oil created. But the principle remains. Light application, cold weather specific. Function over regulation. Prioritize what works over what the manual says should work. Korean War soldiers were taught motor oil maintenance in basic training. Vietnam armorers passed the knowledge as common wisdom. Modern soldiers learn Red's principles even if they do not know his name. The real story, Mitchell wrote in her conclusion, is not about engineering committees or field manuals. Innovation did not come from laboratories. It came from a corporal who had watched his friends die and refused to stay silent. It came from soldiers teaching soldiers in barns and foxholes, passing knowledge that might keep someone alive tomorrow. The official history credits field modifications by multiple infantry units for improved rifle reliability in the European theater, 1944 through 45. That is technically accurate. It is also incomplete. One man figured it out. Thomas Callahan. One man took the risk. One man broke the rules because following them meant watching people die. Red Callahan saved 700 lives with a modification that took 10 minutes and cost nothing. The Army never thanked him. His hometown never knew. His children learned from a historian 40 years after he died. Red would not have cared. He did not do it for recognition. Did it because Frank Murphy and Johnny Blake deserved better than a manual that killed them. Did it because his father had taught him not to trust experts who had never done the work. Did it because sometimes the courage to break rules requires more discipline than the courage to follow them. Today, in every military armory in America, mechanics use principles Red invented in a freezing barn in December 1944. They do not know his name. They just know it works. And Red, if he could see them, would smile, because that was all he ever wanted. Not recognition, just rifles that worked, and men who lived. The last person to visit Red's grave before the historian's revelation was Helen. She went every year on their anniversary, stood at the simple headstone, Thomas Callahan, June 12, 1921 to June 14, 1987. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, veteran. After Mitchell's report was published, other visitors came. Veterans who had used motor oil maintenance, historians researching the modification, families of soldiers who had survived because their rifles worked. Someone left a can of motor oil at the grave. Someone else left a spent M1 Garand cartridge. Someone planted a small American flag. Helen visited the grave one more time before she died in 2008. She was 89, stood at the headstone with her children and grandchildren around her. Tommy, she said, your father was so proud of you. Patrick, he loved you. Sarah, you were his little girl. She touched the headstone. And he saved 700 men, 700 families who never knew his name. The wind blew across the Montana hillside. Below Butte spread out, the mine, Mercury Street, the garage where Red had died. Above, clouds moved across big sky country. Helen spoke to the stone. You kept your promise, Tommy. You never went underground. You never let regulations kill anyone else. And you came home to me. That was all I ever wanted. She touched the headstone one more time, then turned and walked back to the car. Her children followed. Behind them, the small American flag fluttered in the Montana wind. 700 men lived because Thomas Callahan questioned a manual, because he trusted his knowledge over regulations, because he refused to stay silent after watching 7 friends die. The Army adopted his method, but never said thank you. His hometown never knew. His children found out 4 decades after he died. But somewhere tonight in armories across America, young soldiers are learning principles Red invented. They are being taught to use light oil in cold weather, to prioritize function over regulation, to trust what works over what manuals say should work. They do not know his name. They just know it works. And Red, wherever mechanics and soldiers go, when they die, is smiling. Because that was always enough. Not recognition, not glory, just rifles that worked, just men who lived, just keeping the promise he made standing over Frank Murphy's body in the rain. No more silence, no more trusting manuals that kill, no more watching good men die for following regulations written by people who had never been cold. Thomas Callahan kept that promise, and 700 American soldiers came home because of it. Remember his name, honor his choice, and understand that the real heroes are often the ones who never wanted recognition but earned it through actions that changed history. 7 men died so Red would find courage. 700 lived because he did. That was the arithmetic. That was the truth. And that was enough.